Welcome to Michigan Reimagined, presented by TA Forsberg and Wagoner Financial. And here's your host, Chris Buck.
So we've talked regularly about the housing needs in Michigan, but what about like the true affordability of housing and how it drives overall economic growth? Here to talk about the effects of housing affordability is the president of TA Forsberg, Mr. Brent Forsberg. Welcome back to the show, Brent.
Thanks for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
Yeah, so I'm excited about this topic because we talk about, housing in a general sense, and I know that's a pent-up need, but start off by talking a little bit about the affordability of housing and what affordable housing is and what the difference is, because I think that gets kind of thrown around a little bit. I think of affordable housing as almost like subsidized housing, and so what's the difference between like affordable and accessible housing versus affordable housing?
Absolutely. When we talk about affordable housing from HUD's standpoint and MSHDA's standpoint, that is that 60% of adjusted median income and below for an area. And that's where you see the subsidized and where you have the different types of loan programs to try to help create that stability of household. Because, that's the very foundation of society, right, is having a stable home to live in. And, when we start talking about affordability, that opens up a whole range. So that's looking at the idea of, there's called missing middle, workforce. There's lots of different terms. We're still trying to kind of figure out what that is. Michigan, it was codified as attainable. And that attainable idea is looking at just over that 60% threshold and up to 120% in the state of Michigan. In some areas that have even more problems with affordability than we do, that goes up to 150% of adjusted median income.
Okay.
And the point of that is to make sure that there is a stable housing stock for the workforce in the community that can handle the business needs, economic needs for the area.
And that's got to be different, right, for a rural community, people in Manhattan, people in Lansing, Michigan, right? I mean, what is affordable, what is attainable? It all kind of ties to the income of the homeowner, correct?
Absolutely. The income, the cost of living index is one of the biggest ones. And this is why it's such a hard thing to tackle when you talk about the entire United States, because it has this, if you're in San Francisco, Los Angeles, New York, right, that's a completely different level of income needed. So what you're starting to see in research is looking at it from a cost-burdened index.
Okay.
So it's the idea that 30% of your income is what's expected to go towards housing. So when you start going above that, you start eroding quality of life in an area for people. Because, now you have people that can't buy consumer goods. They can't go out to eat. They can't use the recreation that costs money in areas. So, it all kind of folds in together. And so that's where you're starting to see now from the federal government and the state of Michigan is looking at these other indexes. Another one is the ALICE index, Asset Limited Income Constrained Employed, which adds in things like technology and cost of food on top of that as well. And, there's some concerning data out there. Right now, over 44% of the United States lives below the ALICE threshold, which means that they're within 2 months of having a catastrophic event if something happens to them with their income.
What percentage was that?
44% of the United States
is below the ALICE threshold. Mm-hmm. Okay, and that's someone anecdotally told me that basically means like the working poor, right? They have a job, but the sum of their income is that if they have one auto breakdown or a sick child or something like that immediately the negative dominoes fall on their financial stresses, right?
Absolutely. And we saw it from the Fed talking about the reduction in household savings that they've seen this year as we've gone through inflation. So it all kind of paints that picture together. And working poor, it's not called poor because it's well above the poverty level. In some areas, it can be a relatively significant income that if you were here in mid-Michigan. But when you look at it from that relative standpoint, it's scary that we don't have that economic stability in the United States right now. And Michigan is sitting basically right at the average. So, I mean, we're in this area of right around 44%. But if you think about that, there's 550,000 people in this area. So you do the math quick. That's a lot of people that are living kind of at that threshold level.
Paycheck to paycheck.
Yep.
And rents aren't a solution anymore, right? I mean, it seemed like historically home ownership was something you strive to attain. And until you had the money to put together for that, you rent an apartment. But rents are through the roof now too. I mean, so it's even and again, maybe this isn't part of the conversation, but it seems like there's a lot of pressure on people to just be housed.
Yeah.
Well,
rent burden's a big part of it because it erodes the ability to save and move towards a house. And,
right.
They're pretty well correlated, the cost of a mortgage and the rent in an area for, the similar types of amenities in the housing. The other thing that you're seeing why rental is up so much is the way that jobs are moving around now. You take baby boomers coming out of the 60s, 70s, and 80s, generally they lived within 15 miles of where they went to school. You had longer careers. Now it's under 4 years for average position in a job, and people are moving markets. So we've seen the workforce become a lot more transient as it's moving to try to find opportunities around different areas. And it's hard to establish roots and buy a house if you're constantly moving with your job.
Right. Okay. So we talk about, so housing and housing stock and having the right amount of housing, the Salas threshold, rents going up. Clearly, if people aren't flush or living in a housing situation where they're spending 30% or less on their housing needs, there's a trickle down to the general economy and vibrancy, that's affected by that, right? I mean, if you've got good, stable housing that's affordable for your lifestyle, you're more likely to shop more, right? Or go to the Lugnuts game, or go out to have a meal, buy from the local people in the community. And if you are overburdened with your housing, that residual discretionary income isn't there and doesn't get spent, and the whole town can feel that, right? Is that kind of the punchline of all of this?
That is the punch. I mean, that hits it right on the head. I mean, when you talk about vibrancy for an area, one of the 4 key components is consumption of goods in that area. You have net export versus imports, and you have cost of labor, and then you have the availability of jobs for the workforce. That's kind of that formula for understanding economic health from just the business side of it. So, 25% of that is the consumer's goods that are in there. And you're right, you do feel it, because if you're cost burden, you can't go out and participate in the economy, and that's where a lot of the small businesses really get hurt.
Right.
And that's a big part of that whole quality of life index for an area. And that's one thing that, Michigan, compared to a lot of other states, we are ahead, and that's one of the economic opportunities that I think we have for recruiting businesses here. And you're seeing an outmigration in the San Franciscos, in the Los Angeleses, in the New York, because the cost has gotten so expensive that the return for people living there for even those higher wage jobs is just not worth it anymore. So, it gives an opportunity, I think, for the Midwest to really be able to capitalize on this in the next few years.
Right on. Okay. So what can we do to position Michigan, or what could any community do to try to position themselves in an advantageous spot? Not only even to recruit inbound people, but just maybe fix what's already broken in their towns. Like, what needs to happen, what needs to be built. I mean, clearly higher wages, on the same housing stock would certainly help. But it seems like we need additional housing stock too.
We are the 5th most underbuilt market in the greater Lansing area in the country for a mid-sized market. And when you think about that, it's just getting worse on that housing stock, because it is just elasticity of supply and demand when you're looking at it. So if you don't have the supply, cost is going to go up a little bit. And a lot of that, too, is being driven right now where the supply can't go in because the cost of supply is so expensive. When you put in the time needed for the regulations, the cost of infrastructure. So when we're looking at how do we begin to solve this, it's looking at what are those underlying factors. And Michigan's done a lot with that recently, with passing bills to focus on affordability in housing, that missing middle attainable rate of housing. And that's what needs to be done. Is we got to kind of refocus. Okay, we do a lot of recruiting for bringing large businesses here. That's been working. It's great. So now those businesses are even asking, what do we do about housing?
Right. No kidding. That's problematic. So, and that's a puzzle that certainly needs to be figured out. And I think that the state is deploying a lot of resources to try to help attract and retain. I mean, we've got a chief growth officer now in the state. We've got a talent attraction, and engagement team trying to retain the folks we've got here. We've got, the Pure Michigan campaign, but there's even more to it than that, an equal but different type of a campaign trying to lure people to Michigan for all the reasons you just talked about. So, yeah, it's exciting times, but it's certainly a complex puzzle because then you got childcare issues and you got rural broadband and you've got, transportation and public transportation opportunities that would help all of that as well.
Well, and that's the comprehensive living system, and that's what's important is to make sure that they're all addressed. And this is something that we've kind of failed as in regulations over time because we kind of myopic in our approach. Oh, this is a problem, so we go directly after that, and it doesn't take into account everything else that's going on around it. But it's being addressed more comprehensively now. I mean, the quality of life placemaking, all of those types of terms that we've heard are all part of building that together.
And one way to try to avoid some of these pitfalls in your own personal life is to have a great financial planner. And I got to tell you, when it comes to managing your finances and planning for your future, I suggest you contact my friends at Wagoner Financial. Whether you're just getting started, getting ready to retire, or anywhere in between, Wagoner Financial can help you make smart financial decisions. Don't navigate complex problems on your own. Wagoner has the expertise to help you feel confident that you're making the right financial choices. Contact an advisor by calling 517-853-3367 or visit their website at wagoner-financial.com. So, I mean, all of that, the infrastructure of people, the jobs, I mean, it is all one big organism. Yeah. And to your point, it can't be as surgical and tactical to, here's a problem, let's fix it. Here's a problem, let's fix it. It needs to be, and I think the state really does kind of have it together now. I mean, I know, nationwide, there's impressions of Michigan and things that are a bit dated, but I think our offense is pretty strong these days.
Absolutely. And you take in the economic recruitment and working across the country and the focus on the advanced manufacturing that's coming in. I mean, that was manufacturing was our bread and butter in the 20th century, which is why Michigan and Ohio were two of the biggest economic powerhouses of that period. Yep. And now we're seeing it again with some of these new technologies. Then on top of that, MISHDA is coming out soon with their comprehensive housing report for the entire state. So we're going to have a statewide plan. And what's really cool is all of the different regions are working on their piece that's going to go into it. So there's a lot of input. It takes a while because there's so many people that are inputted in this, but it's exciting because we are going to have a clear focus of what housing can look like and how it becomes part of this entire process. Because there's a research article from Anthony. It was just last year, and it's escaping me on the name at the moment. Yeah. But it was one of the first ones that really looked at this direct correlation of the affordability of housing and output per capita of GDP in an area. And when you look at those tier one markets that we talked about earlier, they're starting to see that reduction because they're losing their workforce. They're losing productivity. And areas like the Midwest, I think, are going to win. And this is our opportunity right now to really take this shot and say, we've got all these pieces. We have the quality of life. We have the affordability. And now we're addressing the housing. We're addressing the child care. We're addressing the transportation at a statewide, but also at a hyper-local level, because we're seeing that it all interacts together. So I'm really excited about our opportunities with it. And I think that it really is going to be the time for these smaller tier 2, tier 3 is what they're called in finance. The
tertiary markets.
Yeah, the tertiary. I hate those words, but it's like, great. Though I would rather live in one of those markets than a large one. So
right. No, I don't disagree. So, but there's still dollars and cents behind all of this, right? So it seems like it's easy to say that the type of housing we need right now in mass in mid-Michigan almost can't be built for the price that we want to charge. I'll just throw out a number. I mean, it would be great if we had $175,000 to $250,000 single family homes.
Yep.
Right. And probably some sort of a missing middle or multifamily housing complexes, creatively stationed around the region. But builders that I talk to, and you're one of them, say that, if I build that house, it costs me $300,000 to build it. I can't sell it for $250,000 using just very round numbers. How do we bridge that?
Our friend over at Sinair, Mark McDaniels, made a comment that it's a three-legged stool.
Okay.
So you have the financing component. You have the government policy, regulation, that's zoning, that's code, all of it. And then you have the market itself for it, the labor and materials.
Yep.
And right now, all three of those are kind of broke. I mean, we've seen what's happened with interest rates, and that puts a lot of pressure on being able to bring new product on. I mean, Right now, electrical components around the country are hard to find. And then the policy side, our codes over time have just incrementally grown where it's expensive to build. So it's addressing all of those again in the relationships. And what Michigan's done is they've said, okay, if we're going for affordability in housing, they've put out some tools now, like some increment financing things. But we got to get the business community involved in this too, because if you have 50 open jobs in your production facility that you can't fill because the labor force isn't there, what's your economic loss? And these are the things, the conversations that we have to start having, that this is an actual investment. As we went past World War II, we kind of broke those apart, right? We'll take care of housing over here. It's not really connected to business. They're just kind of correlated together. But go back to what made Michigan great. I've got 3 books at home about the company towns in Michigan. Okay. And businesses made the investment because they knew housing was important. So, and the state's recognizing that too, and looking at some other incentives that could help with that investment coming in. But it's broadening that conversation to say, this is an economic issue for businesses, which makes it an economic issue for regions because it lowers taxes if there aren't people working in there because production's down. It lowers profitability for businesses, and it lowers the quality of life of the overall region because the small businesses that support that ecosystem can't survive.
Right on. Wow. All right. So do you feel like we're on the right path? Is there a solution? It seems like you're optimistic about this, even though it's still an urgent need, right?
It's an urgent need, but yeah, absolutely I'm optimistic, especially here in the Midwest, because one of the things that we have is the supply of land. We look at right now out west where the water resources are so short that some areas can't build anymore. Right. You get down to Arizona, it's done. There's no more water rights. So we have the resources. We have some of the best known labor forces in the country. And you talk to manufacturers about the Midwest, right? That's
what we do.
Yeah, it's what we do. That's the best way to put it.
Yeah.
It's just inherent in us. So we have these pieces that will make it great for us to have these opportunities in the future.
Perfect. Anything else I didn't tee you up to give an answer to? Because there's so much to unpack, and I know, I have you on regularly because I just appreciate everything you've shared with us over the years. So
I am excited about our future, but what it really takes is the conversation of high engagement in the community. So, for all of us that want the quality of life, if we want the nice restaurants, you want the parks, you want the job opportunities, we have to be part of the conversation. And I think that's the biggest message is right now is our opportunity in the Midwest and especially in Michigan to be able to say to the rest of the country, we're here, we have an awesome place to live, come join us.
Right on. Well, we've been talking to the president of TA Forsberg, Mr. Brent Forsberg. I encourage you to check out lansingrealestate.com to learn all kinds of new stuff, and just really appreciate you being here, sharing some of your wisdom.
Thanks for having me.